Two mouse pads? Yes. Well, that's a nice IDR at the end. Agenda. So I've been able to get to yeah. And so if you want to do this, we got to get what you did put us in.
That's all for you.
You want another one of the agenda, so you can put that's the last one I did get. Yes.
Yeah, I think we're about to start.
We are about to start. It's true. Hello, everybody. This is IDR. We're getting started, so please find your seats or find the door, or stand up and back at the peanut gallery, whatever. Sue is going to put a note well on the screen any moment so that you can have seen it, but I bet some people in here have seen it, but I think, yeah, here we go. It is our note well. It is the IETF's policy. You did agree to this thing when you registered to come to the IETF. If you don't know what it says, you probably should acquaint yourself with it. Enough said. We're going to try to cut the whole comments from the chairs thing well short because we would rather spend our limited time on other stuff, especially because Sue has been doing a bang-up job of sending out periodic status updates. So it would be kind of redundant to spend our time here and now sending out status updates, but I realize I should walk around and get these blue sheets moving. Please sign into the blue sheet. And whenever they get to the back of the room, please someone bring them forward so they don't get lost. It's always a pain to have to find the blue sheets at the end of the meeting. Do you want to, so here, the
agenda. Hold on. You don't know well. Go right back to the meeting materials. And there we are. Monday 6. Here we are for our show meeting films. And yours is.
Yep, that's it. And
you got it.
So this is sort of a last minute thing that I put together because essentially I noticed that, I guess I didn't just notice, but we have a lot of Flowspec related drafts. They continue to come in every meeting. I think we've talked about this before, but as a reminder, if you go and look at Flowspec, Flowspec does its thing using NLRI. The NLRI contains Flowspec components. Flowspec components are structured as type value pairs. They are not structured as type length values, just type value. What does that mean? That means you can't write a generic Flowspec parser Unlike unknown path attributes that we can just skip over and keep going and everything's good, you get an unknown Flowspec component and game over. This isn't really good for Flowspec extensibility. There's an exception, which is if you're defining Flowspec over a new AFI-SAFI, that's fine because you've got a demultiplexer up, that you do know how to find, that either you exchange that AFI-SAFI in your MPBGP capability, in which case you will know how to parse the components, or you don't, in which case you won't get the components, so that's fine. But you just get one shot, once you've defined your new AFI-SAFI with your new components in it, that's it. Forget about extending it later. Some years ago, we had a Flowspec v2 proposal that, among other things, represented components as type length values, so obviously they wouldn't have this problem. But instead, we have not worked on that actively because we have taken, did the quick thing of doing the BIS document first. As with all quick things, it wasn't quick. So the thing that I would like to put out for, potentially a couple minutes of discussion right now, and I will also follow this up to the list, of course, is just, it seems to me, as the co-chair, that it doesn't really make sense for us to advance documents that define component types that can be expected to make peering sessions fall over if you actually transmit them across the session. So that kind of implies that either we stop extending Flowspec or we get back to work on some kind of follow-on, whether it's resuscitating the V2 draft or doing something else is up for discussion. We have a few minutes for discussion if anyone wants to make a comment. Otherwise, we can talk on the list later.
Jared Mach, Akamai. Makes sense to me that we should fix the TLV oversight. Which method doesn't matter to me.
Jeff has spent a lot of time in the last year actually working on Flowspec code, and some of the reason why you have some of this stuff in 5575 BIS. Item number 1, PCEP actually picked up our format and was going to stick it in their protocol. They received this warning. They did the same thing, except for their components actually include link fields, so they do not suffer from this problem. So we have at least one existence proof of change the format, makes it happy. Thing number 2, we should gate these new things, I believe, on something that has a TLV. I think that a Flowspec v2 makes sense. I think the scoping of the Flowspec v2 proposal may need to be rediscussed because it's been long enough. The minimal thing that we need is just simply make it TLV. Flowspec v2 also try to advance it in terms of like firewall rule ordering. We have to decide if we still want that.
Thank you.
Hi, Igor Vishinsky, Verizon Media, Yahoo, Edgecast, whatever. Absolutely agree with
Mike.
Absolutely agree with what both Jeff and Jared have said. The current mechanism of we really cannot extend Flowspec because it will make routers fall over, and TLV is just an oversight. And let's bite the bullet and fix it.
Thank you. Well, that seems like consensus in the room. So anyway, we'll discuss it further on the list. But I think that will be the even though I'm standing up here, I do have a chair's hat on right now. I think that's going to be the position of the chairs going forward. Is you can discuss your extension draft, but I think that we are going to want to prioritize the group's time on getting the TLV thing done so that we can actually roll out those extension drafts.
So as the author of the previous one, I really don't care just as long as we fix the TLV problem. So open proposals are okay on this. We have a Flowspec in working group last call, the chairs wanted to make sure we knew what if we had any sense from the room. Again, we'll send more of this out to the mail list, but seems like it would be a whole lot better to fix it. So speaking of flow specs, are we ready for Donald? Yep. And he's using a different affy-saffy, so.
He is.
Which is why we wanted to. I think I've got it. It should advance.
Okay, hi. So after that,
Let me try this. Nope,
I guess I
that
use it.
didn't
No,
work.
that's not quite right. So I'm going to talk about 2 drafts in only 10 minutes.
Good, now it's.
Hopefully with some time for discussion. So I'll be moving along here pretty quickly. Layer 2 VPN and tunnels. So the L2 Vpn Flowspec Draft has a number of changes from version 11, particularly clarifying that it applies to IETF SAFI 134. Includes some stuff about validation, so you can tell it if Flowspec is coming from a source authorized to send that. It has a very minor extension for the drop eligible indicator bit, which is a bit in VLAN tags, so it can be checked and set. It basically defines new component types for L2, and those now have TBD values rather than fixed numbers, which used to be in the previous version. And there, of course, there are various editorial changes. So I'd like to resolve questions at the end because I want to make sure I get through the expository text on the drafts. But the question arose on the mailing list with the expert on whether this can use SAFI 134. So IETF is defined as the AFI for L2 VPN, and SAFI 34 currently in the EANA registry says VPN v4 dissemination of Flowspec rules. The IPv6 draft is going to expand that to be L3, but then this draft proposes to change it to VPN dissemination, because you can tell from the AFI whether it's IPv4 or IPv6 or possibly in this case layer 2. So why do you need to use a new different SAFI from 134? Because the AFI tells you what's going on. And you also might want to apply what's in this draft to non-VPN cases. And there's a convenient AFI for that. You can use AFI 6 and SAFI 133 unambiguously from the definition of that AFI, and SAFI would clearly make what case it was applicable to obvious to anybody getting that. So that's the question people can think about it while I go over the other draft. Is there a good reason to have another SAFI? Which I think this burns one for no particular good reason for this L2 VPN. So the other draft, the file name is unchanged and has NV03, but the revision to the draft has been made from version 06 to 07, makes it really not NV03 specific. The 06 focused there. It didn't really say anything about SAFI. It wasn't really clear what SAFI was being used or anything. So not too good a draft in that regard. Although it had lots of other good stuff in it. It only supported VXLAN and NVGRE, and it worked by having a delimiter component, which marked a boundary. So it sort of was like adding a component, which, as we found, at least currently, doesn't work at all, and may not be probably the best way to do it in this case anyway. So the new draft, 06-7, changes this quite a bit. It's really a general tunneling or encapsulation kind of flow spec. It proposes to use a new SAFI, which is TBD, and it has in it details about VXLAN, not just VXLAN and NVGRE, but also L2 TPv3, IP and IP, GRE, etc. And it has a new NLRI structure, which can contain one or optionally also a second flow spec. So one applies to the outer header and the other applies to the nested inner header, which you would need frequently, but not always. So this is kind of what things look like. This shows the overall attribute. The higher level is the multi-protocol BGP attribute, where there's an AFI-SAFI, next hop information. Then there's the NLRI, and it begins in this draft with a tunnel type. So the tunnel type actually acts sort of as an additional thing. If you don't understand the tunnel type, you can skip over the whole attribute. So you could add things for specific tunneling headers later, even with the same AFI-SAFI, as long as they had a different tunnel type. Okay, then there's some flags. routing discriminator and a second FlowSpec flag and some reserve flags, routing discriminator field, and then there's the outer FlowSpec, which is always there. That's the next to the last box here, and that is essentially parsed or whatever based on the AFI that's at the top of the attribute. And if the second FlowSpec flag is on, then there is another AFI and the inner FlowSpec, and that inner AFI applies to the inner FlowSpec, of course. So there's also this routing discriminator bit. So if this is the VPN case, you need a routing discriminator to tell what VPN or VRF the stuff is in that you're trying to look for. And but it might or might not be, so that's an optional thing. This way, you only need one SAFI rather than two different SAFIs for the VPN and non-VPN case. You could do it with two SAFIs, but it seems cheaper to use a bit, which determines whether the routing discriminator is present. So this just blows up the NLRI, gives more detail, shows the length fields and so forth. This draft also has more components that defines because of the other kinds of tunneling it covers. Previously, it only was VXLAN and NVGRE and only had added the tunneling header components for those. It extends the FlowSpec ordering rule so you can tell what precedence is if you have a tunneling and a non-tunneling FlowSpec that both match or something like that. Includes validations based entirely on the outer FlowSpec, so whether the source of the FlowSpec is authoritative. So here's two examples. The first one is IP and IP. So you could have, in this case, you would almost always have an outer and inner FlowSpec because it's not worthwhile doing really for simple IP and IP unless you have an inner FlowSpec which can match the inner IP address, and the outer one matches the outer one. And in the case of L2 VPN, there might be MAC stuff there, in which case you need to use a appropriate AFI, and you could have L2 stuff as well. This is VXLAN, so this is a little more complex, but over at the right side, it shows what would be covered by the outer FlowSpec. That is, say, the FlowSpec that's always present that applies to the outer header, and what would be under the inner FlowSpec. So, but either one of them can contain components that match on VXLAN content fields. And in both cases, there'd be a difference. There'd be the tunneling FlowSpec SAFI would be there. So you would only get to code that knows how to parse this additional field. And you also would have to match the tunnel type. So I don't know, I could go over these different fields, but I'm not sure there's too much here that's obscure or anything. So what is this? So I particularly would like to have some indication whether the working group thinks we'd actually need to use a brand new SAFI for the L2 VPN, or whether we can use AFI 25, which is L2 VPN, and SAFI 134 for FlowSpec. And I'm hoping to get to early allocation of the code points for that, but you need to resolve that question and do one more rev of the draft. For the NVO3 FlowSpec, which I could change the name or something if people don't like that file name because it's no longer fully specific to NVO3. I'd like people to look at the latest version of the draft and provide feedback. I do think it needs another pass to polish things and improve it. And the goal is to get code points for there. Also, and the goal of the code points, of course, is to get implementations and see what we discover when we do that.
And so I want to underline that the purpose right here is to see if this is ready for early allocation of code points so they can try out some of the ideas and make sure they're ready for having an implementation. We are looking for feedback at that point.
Jeff Oz. So one of the reasons that a different AFI-SAFI pairing is a good idea, no matter what, is you're changing FlowSpec precedence rules. So the problem would be like, let's say that you just stuck this into one of the existing AFI-SAFIs as just a new component type. You want the evaluation to be a different order than what's actually in there, and that's the whole point of an AFI-SAFI. The route selection is consistent across the entire domain. So if you want to actually break that rule by changing, so your FlowSpec rule adds slightly different comparison steps. You just covered that in the prior slide.
Well, this is okay. So in the NVO3, quote NVO3, unquote, FlowSpec rule,
yeah,
it does extend the precedence rule for multiple matches, but that uses a new SAFI TBD.
And that's my point.
Yes.
You want to have a new
Okay.
SAFI for
Right.
that reason.
Yeah, but my question really is for the L2 VPN one, where I think we can just use 134, 25, 134 for AFI-SAFI, and it has been asserted by at least one person that that's terrible and we have to have a new SAFI there. But I think that's unambiguous and it's well defined. So a new SAFI for the tunnel flow spec, I completely agree with you.
And the only reason to wait is sort of for the reason that we were talking about. If you stuck this into the existing AFI-SAFI type stuff, regardless whether the evaluation is correct, a lot of implementations say, I don't know what this component is, and drop the peering session. So you're gated behind the V2 work, or you go with a different AFI-SAFI.
Yeah, well, I would claim that it wouldn't, would need to have specified an AFI with this new SAFI for the tunneled one. And if it did that, then it would understand that there was a tunneling type there. And if it accepted the tunneling type, it would understand the components associated with that tunneling type.
Hello, working group member John Scudder. In my opinion, you're perfectly fine reusing the existing SAFI. As you say, both AFI and SAFI provide context. So since you're, contextualizing it with the AFI as well, great. Don't burn the extra code point. Fine.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. One of the things that, again, because John presented it first, hopefully you're thinking about should this go in a V2 fixing the type length order? My suggestion is to give him code points even if we make a V2 decision so that we can get experimentation going as soon as possible.
And so just to add, I think that in the case of this pair of drafts, in fact, I had a bullet on my one slide that I think covered your draft, which said that if you're defining flow spec over a new AFI-SAFI pair, you're okay because it's fully defined. And I think that's the point Jeff was making at the mic too. Right. So I don't see there any impediment, on that basis to, moving forward with these two drafts.
Right. It's actually the pairwise of the AFI and the SAFI together that is the important piece. You could reuse the same magic number in SAFI. If the AFI is different, the code is different. So that's okay. One other thing I would point out is that looking at the SAFI registry, 241 up to like 254 is reserved for private use. You could just grab that and start playing with it.
Okay. For temporary use.
Yeah, but don't be shipping it.
Oh, I don't ship anything. Other people ship anything. Okay, thank you. Anything else?
Okay. I think we're good. Good. Thank you.
Okay.
So I think we have my hash now.
You should be on the next one. If I didn't do what I just did and blow it off. Yep.
Do you want me to stop vehicles? No. I guess I can. If I walk around with a mic or something, I don't know.
Did I get it working?
Thank
right?
you.
No, I didn't. Okay, my apologies.
All right, I'm going to talk about the BGP Yang model. To begin with, we have a new author edition, and Jeff has agreed to join and be an author on the draft, and thanks for his contributions. I'm not going to go through the status. You can go through it, look at it. The diffs are, of course, there. If you have any questions, feel free to post on the mailing list. So I'm going to talk about 5 issues that we are tracking. They're being tracked in GitHub at that particular location. Feel free to comment on any of the issues there if you want, or on the mailing list. Either one is fine. I'm going to go through each one of them, and if I don't hear any objections, and by also posting on the mailing list, if I don't hear any objections, I'm going to assume that it's okay to proceed and implement them. All right, so the first is, should Confederation be a peer type? Currently, we have 3, internal, external, and Confederation, which was probably not the correct way to do it. So the 2 new additions are the Confederation internal and Confederation external. Any comments? Okay. None. So noted. We'll take it to the mailing list also. Jeff. So I think the question is, would you differentiate?
Jeff, as the question from Randy Bush would to differentiate it, yes? So the motivation is peering sessions are internal and external, and are you peering with your confederation, yes or no? From an op state, we've always shown it's internal or external, and we need to show if it's confederation because the rules differ.
But they're orthogonal. So you could have internal confederation, external confederation. You've got 4.
Right. So our 2 choices for modeling this was to have enum for internal, external, and then have a Boolean that's confed or not, which is sort of what you have. But when you're trying to reflect the actual state of the session for what BGP rule you do, you basically have to say which of these 4 things it is the cross product. So we're not saying it's the best one way or the other. Like I said, there's a second option in there. Please take a look at the model and see which one you think makes sense.
Stefan Litkowski, one question to you. Are we talking here about operational state or configuration state?
This is strictly for operational state. Maybe that was not clear.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Okay, the second issue that we're tracking is for the list of ASPath segments. So ASPath will always be maintained as a 4-byte. If routers that are not 4-byte capable, route update should consist of either AS trans value, the magic number, or AS 2-byte. Comments? Questions? I see Rudiger.
Rüdiger Volk, Deutsche Telekom. I think this is my standard comment and remark for something like 15 years. Are we expecting that the young modeling is going to happen on routers that do not have 4-byte ASs?
Okay. Yeah, no, that was my state. AC Lindum. I don't think you're going to find somebody implementing the Yang model that doesn't support 4-byte ASs. I mean,
right.
it's would be there. How many implementations are there of this Yang model? I mean, I know there's a few OpenConfig, but this Yang model.
So I would interpret both of those comments as supporting choice number 1. I'll ask people to keep their comments brief just because we have a lot of material to cover.
Yeah, just a clarification comment. The 4-byte capable in this case is not this is UAT32 data structure. This is supporting RC4893 for 4-byte ASs.
The third issue that we're tracking is the ASPath length container. It'll contain the calculated ASPath length for routes per 4271 rules. And this is mainly for the user to see the number that serves as input to the BGP route selection. Again, op state, yes. Okay, no comments. Support for authentication. So currently we are tracking supporting authentication either over IPsec, TCP MD5, and TCP AO. With the idea that we'll probably try to achieve this using IETF keychain model that AC and others have worked on.
AC, is this work for you? We're looking to use the keychain model.
Yeah.
AC Lindum, I believe we have everything you need if you look at the algorithms and the
key rollover.
No, the key rollover is there.
Okay.
Key roll. I mean, there's even an example how you would do hitless key rollover. The implementation just have to support it.
Okay.
I mean, we've been doing it in the CL, not the Yang model, but the CLI version for ages. It's just that not all protocols support key change with the key rollover.
Okay.
Randy Bush, is the key rollover 4808?
Sorry?
is the key rollover 4808. Uh-oh, I'm in trouble with K here.
I'd have to get back to you on that. I don't know I don't know the details of 4808.
I was asking you hash.
No,
He says it supports key rollover.
40 RFC 4808?
Yeah. You'll love it. It's real simple.
So, Jeff Oz, Randy, Mahesh does not know the details. This is us reusing existing models. So if the model that is being defined by AC's Yang module supports it, then we'll support it by inheritance. That's the idea.
Okay. Yeah, if that was the question. Okay.
Stefan Litkowski, regarding TCP MD5, do we really need to support it if we want people to move to TCP/IO?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yes, so you want to make sure that this can support existing routers and existing deployments, even if this is not something that we would recommend as security.
So, AC Linux Cisco systems. So for IPsec, as far as I know, there's no native IPsec for TCP. You'd have to just define an IPsec tunnel that uses that as the selector. So this is orthogonal to this model. You wouldn't include IPsec in this model. What is it?
So to your point, AC, our implementation, Juniper, and at least a couple of your flavors over at Cisco have direct integration into the BGP configuration for IPsec static associations. Okay. That's what's being done here, is to allow the keying of the session to be tied into the BGP configuration.
Okay. I don't know if the existing keychain model supports every algorithm, because the keychain model supports both key and algorithm agility for the rollover.
Okay.
So I don't know if we have every algorithm that you might want to use.
The question, AC, is not whether you have every algorithm, but can we express what you're doing in most of the current vendors at this time? If you think that's to be true, then we'll go on.
We looked at both TCP/AO and TCP MD5 while we were doing the keychain model.
Right. Can I suggest that, a few of you that have all the details in your brain sit down together sometime this week and just thrash it out and make sure it all works?
Right. So the meta here is that we don't want to invent this ourselves. This is something that IETF is trying to standardize. And if they don't have it standardized, we want them to help standardize it.
Right. Talk among yourselves.
Okay.
Just a quick note, Kayur Patel, Arcus. The keying mechanism that is described here, that AC's draft supports us, as he said, for MD5 and AO. For IPsec, you probably want to look at something which was discussed in CARP working group that's close, but you need a keying mechanism or a key material to be exchanged.
Okay. And final issue is features and attributes that lack references. There's a list of them. I've asked Sue in particular to see if she
so
can.
This is where the chair, I take off my co-author hat and put on the chair hat. This is essentially in order to get to be effective within the Yang community, we need to actually define these. So we'll need to put together a description. There are two options in a chair model: separate draft or this draft. My suggestion is to make that clear and easy for everybody to debate on. We put it in a separate draft. If you're from a vendor and you implement some of these features, I'm interested in talking to getting a small cadre of people to push this quickly.
Very quickly, AC Linda, what we did for the IGP models is we put a line and we said no more features in them. And then these features are going to have to come in augmentations.
Okay, for this particular model, one of the things was we wanted the common features. This has the inheritance from some of the open config work where we have the common features. These are, as far as we can tell.
Yeah, these are old as the hills. Yeah, okay. So this is part of the base.
Right. This is part of the base model. We believe they're widely implemented, but they lack references.
I have a question that now for the model, how to implement for multi-public instance, not for VR or VRF. I mean that if I have multiple BGP instance, both run VPN v4 or other just AFI, then I have some VRF instance. It also run BGP for PE to CE. But for example, one VRF1, I want to use the BGP instance one to advertise VPN4 roles, and the VRF2 I have for another.
Excellent point, but not the focus of this particular model. This particular model is just the base. Did I misunderstand his comment?
Yeah,
then Jeff, go ahead and answer.
One other thing, I don't think you said your name. Can you please give your name for the minutes?
Oh, my name is. I have sent mail list. I have asked the question before. Yeah.
He is Haibo Yang.
Yeah, Haibo Wang. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah, and the partial discussion that we had was the NMDA model for network instancing gives him a portion of what he's looking for. We need to close the loop on the last piece of the component that he was discussing. I think I remember the threading question.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just to complete on this slide, so these are individual will be surrounded by individual feature statements, so that make them optional to implement. Just wanted to make that.
So I have a question, Alberto Rotano, Routing AD. So you're saying you're going to document what these features, how these features operate somewhere else?
The request, Mahesh gave us a pre-look at what the Yang doctors might say, that these would need to have some documentation they can point to.
Yes, and I love references and I love to see what this actually means. The question is, again, the intent is to have a draft, a separate draft, one or more, standards track, draft that documents these features.
In this case, Alvaro, I'm treating it in my chair hat as a case where you have a document, and for clarity's sake, you break the document into multiple documents.
No, that's fine. So the observation that I want to make is that we know how long the process can take for each one of these documents. And if it's not one, if it's multiple, 6, right? Maybe. Consider if there are features that you can define in there. I don't know, advertising active routes. That sounds like a 2-sentence thing where you can describe what that is. Maybe that is something that you could just put in the draft, right? It's not normative for anyone else. Maybe it's something you want to put there. Just consider that.
The current discussion among the authors is a separate draft, Alvaro. If you have more input, please let us know.
That would be wonderful, yes. AC Lindum, so maybe not for all, some of these, it seems like you could just put them in the description in the Yang model and that would be enough. But I'm not saying that applies to every one of them, but like always compare med. That seems like that would be a paragraph like this and you could completely describe.
So in interest of time, I'd like to cut off further discussion, even though I have some comments I would like to make about it too. I'm not going to make them. So we can continue later.
Thank you very much, working group, for active discussion here. Did I get the right draft? Did I have the right one next? Yes.
Yeah. Ideal location. Thank you.
Okay. So let me do whatever magic I'm trying to do. There it goes.
Hi everyone. Today I'm Huai Mo Chen.
Closer to the mic.
Yeah,
okay. Huai Mo Chen from FutureWay. Today I'm going to talk about the BGP for ID allocation. So basically, we have adoption call from April. Then we have a number of comments. I think the major one is that some people don't like using BGP LSS for SIDs. and also suggested that using a new FE-SAVI, and then the other comments. So in this draft, we addressed all the comments. So especially the first one, the most important one. So since some people don't like this kind of extension to BGP LLS for SID, so we just get rid of that one. And then we use the suggestions. So we use the new FE and SAVI for SID as suggested. And then for those other comments, for example, people says, why you use a BGP, why not use a YANG, and then those stuff. So we give more detailed explanations for those why and why not in the draft. And then also some people mentioned that we're missing something, withdraw. If we want to withdraw these SIDs, then we need to do something. So we also address those one. And in addition to that, we added capability negotiations. So any other comments regarding for this new version?
I encourage discussion on the list as well. It's since they've we made an adoption call and they've tried to address it. It would be helpful if there's something you think still broken or still needs to be worked on. Okay, thank you. We'll go on to the next.
Okay, thank you.
Are you the next one as well?
Yeah, next one.
Okay. And hopefully I now will get this quickly.
Yeah, I'll also go quickly.
Yes, go ahead.
So another one is a Flowspec for SRv6. So basically with very small extensions. So for existing Flowspec is for traditional IPs. So we extend the margin field to the SIDs in the SRH. So just two component type. So in last version, we already talk about these two new types. So one type is for margin conditions to a whole SID. So another type is for margin conditions. So focus on the some parts of that IDs, such as a locator and a function or arguments. So basically, we define the format of this one is similar to the existing Flowspec. So each one will contain a list of op and values. So this list will define the margin conditions. As soon as these margin conditions are satisfied, so action will happen. So those actions are the same as the existing one. So the format for the change for in this version is that we just give more detailed specific format for the second component type, which is we would like to focus on some parts of SIDs, such as locator, function, and arguments. So any comments for this one?
So we recently improved the V6 Flowspec by releasing it and making it, and this thing hat co-author on the V6. Have you taken a look at it? I realize we just made the deadline, so maybe you didn't. It might, if you haven't, I forgot to mention that yesterday, that if you're looking for the V6, if you're only SRv6, that may not be as germane. But if you're looking at regular V6 and you need to harmonize, so does the SRv6 need to be harmonized with the regular V6?
Oh yeah, a little bit different, because regular V6 is also focused on those kind of traditional IP domains.
Yes.
For this one, we extend this kind of a margin domain inside those SRH. So we go a little bit deeper.
So we're two different apples and oranges. That's what I had initially thought, but as you were presenting, I wanted to listen. Is there any other comments? How is the SR6 work coming? Are we progressed enough to look at flow specs?
AC Lindup, I just have a comment on all these flow specs and the idea of getting a flow spec for every end cap. Is there a framework for what you're going to do with this? It seems like you're doing open flow with flow spec, right? Is there some document that describes the requirement and what you're doing with this? Or is it just because if there's an end cap exists, we'll do a flow spec for it?
Okay. See John's first slide. Our first thing is we think we ought to, as chairs, again, chair hat on, we ought to go back and fix the basics of TLV. Then as to the rest, that would be an appropriate time to say what, if you think we should narrow our scope. At the original definition of flow spec, there was a very targeted audience and a very targeted focus. The addition requests have indicated that the same denial of service attack work is concerned. We haven't done, when I presented the original V2, right. I had called for a thought, your exact question of harmonization. The working group asked to put it off till we got the BIS out. So your comment is germane, and I think the working group should reconsider all these things. The reason I asked about the SRV6, this is a new type of carrying plater that seems to take the V6 control plane. I don't know enough personally as to the deployment, so that was a question I asked.
Yeah, AC Lindemann, it seems like the header document is at least done. I don't know about, locator. It seems like there's only a couple ways you could do it.
So we have some time to discuss the V2 and to talk about this limitation.
Go ahead and make your comments. Please keep them brief if you can. Line is closed after you guys because Waymo still has one more thing to go through. KR was up first. Go ahead.
KR Patel, I think we should hold this work till we have the flow spec V2 hashed out, and you could then use this as a capability or a new TLV and carry it. Having one SAFI would be a much better choice from an implementation perspective than to get a SAFI explosion within flow spec.
Yeah, okay.
That's good feedback.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Jeff Eisen, as far as the applicability goes, the motivation that all these different authors have for trying to drill into the contents of various tunneled packets is FlowSpec is being used for two big cases right now. The first one for dealing with standard DDoS type things at various network edges, which may be under some types of tunnels, as an example. If, for example, if pick a topic near and dear to like Linda's heart, if it's an SD-WAN type of implementation, you may need to be able to do a FlowSpec filter targeting a specific port for a specific encapsulation and still do all the firewall type things that FlowSpec is good for. So that's one motivation. The second motivation, I suspect, from some of the people in the participants, is that they're using the FlowSpec filters to be able to be used for traffic engineering purposes.
Yeah, next one. Okay, thank you.
Is the next presentation? Yep.
Yeah, next one. Yeah, that'll be quick. I'll go quick. Okay.
Yep, you've got three, and you've got to keep moving. Okay.
Yeah, this one is about extension to BGP for SR pass ingress protection. So right now we already have SR policy draft is in working group, is working group document. So SR policy will send a SR pass to the ingress node of that pass, and the ingress node will set up that pass. But when that ingress fails, so in order to provide protection for the failure of that ingress node, so we needed to also send another backup path to a backup Ingress node. So the backup path will be from that backup Ingress node to the Ingress node. In addition to that, we may have some kind of information for the protections. So basically, in the previous version, we already talked about this kind of extensions. So the extension is very small, and then we just add sub-TLVs. This sub-TLV contains information for the protections. And then in this version, we just made a little bit of change, add more description, a sub-TLV, which describes the traffic that backup path will transport. So this is the sub-TLV details. Yeah, that's all. Any comments?
So on all of this, a couple of times I've queried the spring chairs on some of the policy. I also ask if you're working toward using the spring policy, that you at least give me a heads up operationally what this is being used for. On the RPD acceptance as a draft, I also call for operator input.
Okay. Hi, Andrew here from Liquid Telecom. We are using SR policy, a fair amount of it, primarily for steering traffic around places that, how do I put this? Certain customers do not want to route over certain locations, over certain hardware, etc., etc. And so we give them the option to steer around it via a web page. That is all done with SR policy injection. And it's a big deal for us. Looking at this, I will admit that I have not read the drafts, this proposal before this meeting, my bad. But my question here would be, if I'm going to send a backup path at the moment over the SR stuff, why am I not just going to send two separate paths using two separate communities to dictate which router accepts them and send it like that, rather than complexifying my policy saying to the router, create another path, when I can simply inject the two paths, do all the calculations on the back end, and then set the communities to determine which router accepts. To me, that seems like a lot simpler option, and it leaves the control in my controller to calculate all of those paths. That would be my comment on this.
I would appreciate if that type of comment also went toward the spring chairs with a reference to this. Some of this is refreshment, and that's very good feedback and questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it? Thank you very much for being here.
All right, so I think we're up to Job, and we're almost running on time. I will ask people's indulgence to say just a few extra minutes so that he can have his full 10 minutes, but we're darn close to being on time anyway.
So if almost on time, you mean I have to go slow or fast?
You have 10 minutes.
You can
Perfect.
start.
Do I have a clicker?
He's got it. I just have to get this up. I got it.
Job Snyder's NTT. I want to provide a small update on some work that was presented in IETF 104 in the GROW working group. And my hope is that this work can transition to the IDR working group, which is why I'm here. But some of you have already seen parts of this presentation. The topic at hand is BGP maximum prefix limits. BGP maximum prefix limits are a very popular mechanism in the operator world to dampen the negative effects of mostly full table route leaks. So it's a very crude mechanism, but it helps against very common occurrence that we see in the internet routing system. If you look at the core BGP specification, which introduced BGP maximum prefix limits, there is no notion of whether those prefix limits are applied pre-import policy or post-import policy. I've created an image where on the x-axis we see a progression over time, and the y-axis is the amount of prefixes that one network is sending to the other network. And when a leak occurs, the amount of routes advertised to the adjacent network goes up until it hits a certain threshold where the common operational procedure is to configure the device so that it tears down the BGP session. And from that moment on, even though the eBGP session is destructed, both networks are in a safer state than they would be if the leak persists. Now, this is what happens pre-policy. What can occur if a maximum prefix limit is applied post-policy is that between an eBGP prefix-based filter that derived from, say, IRR data or in case RPKI-based BGP origin validation is applied, that so many routes are rejected in the policy that the amount of routes that make it through the policy does not exceed the threshold, in which case, even though you have a full routing leak, full table route leak, if you have high quality filters, a part of the leak still makes it through and the session does not tear down because the thresholds are not reached. This is a discovery we've made in the real world, where at some point we in NTT realized, hey, we were contributing to a route leak that lasted for multiple hours. How come, why do we even observe this behavior? There are benefits to both pre-policy maximum prefix limits and post-policy maximum prefix limits. The pre-policy limit feature is very effective against full table route leaks. And it is also very effective to protect against memory exhaustion in case a BGP implementation is operating with a fully populated adjacent RIP in. The advantages of a post-policy limit could be to protect against RIP or VIP exhaustion, or to enforce contractual agreements between parties. An example of this could be that as part of a layer 3 VPN service, only X amount of routes are allowed into that VPN. The illustration here is that both use cases exist in the wild, and I think they're valid use cases. Now, if we go take a look at what is available to operators these days, it appears there's a wild myriad of interpretations of the particular sections of the core BGP spec on how to do maximum prefix limits. Specifically on iOS XR and XE, the concept of pre-policy limits does not exist at all. And then on other platforms, for instance, OpenBSD's OpenBGPD, the post-policy variant does not exist. And I believe that this inconsistency between BGP implementations may be a result of the lack of mentioning that pre-policy and post-policy limits could exist in the original BGP specification. My hope is that by specifying that both exist and how they should behave, that we can encourage vendors to consider implementing both types of limits, and I believe this will have positive impact on the operational community. A second aspect of the draft we would like to work on is the notion of outbound maximum prefix limits. Very crude that's a difficult word. From the concept of entities perspective, being a simple internet transit provider, the general case is that we will either announce a full routing table to appear or a subset of that full routing table, say half of the full routing table. And in the instance where to the peers where we only intend to announce our customer routes, which is half, if we would exceed a threshold of say 400, 500,000 routes, whatever is happening is wrong, and we would be better off if we self-destruct our sessions on that particular eBGP neighbor. So the concept of outbound maximum prefix limits serves to facilitate situations where maybe the peer did not configure any limits, but we have expectations of what we expect to announce to the specific adjacent network, and that we can opt to shoot ourselves in the head should certain high watermarks be reached. Now, only BERT as an implementation supports this today, and I have a beta of OpenBGPD to consider for testing. I'm aware that there are a number of complexities related to this feature. Should this be adopted as a working group, we will need to identify those complexities and see if we can resolve them. So I'm not passing this off as a trivial feature, but I think it is worth attempting to specify this. So compared to IETF 104, I've come to an important insight. In that GROW meeting back then and there, I advocated that only a cease notification should be applied if maximum prefix limits are met. Reasoning from the perspective of internet routing, where tearing down the session is a more desirable state of being compared to keeping the session up, but stop accepting new advertisements. However, upon rereading the core BGP specification, it became clear to me that already today in the core spec, we have two options of dealing with hitting the maximum prefix limits. One is keep the session up but block new extra announcements, and one is to go through the motions of tearing down the session. So we will need to rework the draft to provide compatibility with what already exists. Even though as an internet operator, it is not my favorite option, I do not wish to alter that part. I want to, my goal is to revise and clarify and not take things away. Sue has been very kind in providing an extensive review of our first step at this draft, and she also provided the primary motivation to move the work from GROW to IDR, as she was able to articulate with some patience to us that these things can only materialize if we do this as an update to 4271. In doing so, I've come to realize that there's a fair bit of spaghetti to untangle, because the concept of maximum prefix limits is mentioned in numerous sections, and well, it is a very exciting puzzle. And yeah, we would benefit from help in how to not only articulate what we want to accomplish, because I think in natural language, the notion of pre-policy versus post-policy is fairly easy to explain from one person to another. But we should also be very careful in not making the the current text that we want to update worse. And foremost in this effort is to drive consistency across multiple BGP implementations and provide users of BGP implementations with a reference which they can maybe consider in their RFPs. So the next step is to go through another round of cleanup to see if we can improve the language and undo some of the spaghetti. And then I would like to move forward with asking for working group adoption and work on this jointly.
Thank you. I would like to say let's not have questions at the mic because we're 2 minutes over our 3 minutes over. So now we're 5 minutes over, and I don't, I've seen people filtering out. So I think it's, sort of, let's respect the group's time. If you have points to make, by all means, please make them on the list, or you know where to find Job. Thank you again.
Thank you.
That one for that. Thank you, Joe. I think the slide, the first slide you brought in was excellent.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm glad I somehow.
You provided, as I said, the reason why